Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's expert webinar titled Reactive Forms of in Angular. I am Ria from SpringPeople. We are India's largest enterprise training providers and I will be your moderator for today's session. In today's session, we have Pallavi Prasad with us, an accomplished corporate trainer passionate about bridging the gap between technology and business. With over 500 successful training sessions delivered, she has earned recognition as a trusted expert in her field. Pallavi is laser-focused expertise in C with data structures, OOPS concepts, C++, VC++, multi-threading, core Java, JEE, Spring Hibernate, Unix, Linux, shell scripting, .NET Framework 3.5, CVB.NET, ASP.NET, ADO.NET, JavaScript, PhoneGap, Cordova. Delivering timely and effective training has consistently added value to organizations, ensuring that participants are well equipped to apply their knowledge effectively in real-world settings. In today's webinar, Pallavi will inform us about understanding forms in Angular, types of forms building, and validating reactive forms, advantage of forms, and demo.
So, hi everyone, and welcome to this particular session. As Ria has already introduced me, my name is Pallavi Prasad, and today we are going to be having a look at how to work with reactive forms in Angular. So, as you very well know, this is the agenda that we are going to be having a look at today. So, let's start by understanding forms per se, not necessarily Angular forms. So, as you know, every application that we have, every web application that we have, requires some kind of form filling in some capacity or the other in our entire application setup. So it could be a login form, a registration form, a contact form, update form, anything at all. There are forms everywhere in any kind of an application that we make use of. So we mainly use these forms for any kind of a user interaction, anything at all. Even for simple day-to-day data entry tasks also, we work with these forms. So whenever you're going to have a form in your application, there are some questions to which these forms provide answers. So one of the problems that we have is how to keep track of the global form state. Second is which parts of the form are valid and which are still invalid. Then sometimes the display of error messages doesn't pop up correctly. So what to do when we are going to give it wrong values? There has to be some validations and everything. And enter Angular. So Angular has provided us with ways of handling all these issues and creating forms. In Angular, we have two types of forms that are provided to us. One is called the template-driven forms, and the second one is reactive forms. So now, what are these template-driven forms? When we were working with Angular JS, which was one of the first versions of Angular, it started off as a library. So in the first edition of Angular, which was Angular JS, they had given us access to something, to a directive called as ng-model. Now this directive had the property of allowing us to work with two-way data binding. So when we say two-way data binding, it means we can talk to the component that is available to us in the backend logic, and the component can talk back to the view that we have in the front end. So as all of you know, Angular sits on the MVVM architecture, that is model view model architecture. So basically, I want to be able to communicate with the model or the component that is there in the backend, and the component has to communicate back to me through the same form that I'm making use of. So they introduced ng model to benefit this particular two-way data binding that we had. And they were the classic forms that we had in case of AngularJS. These forms were pure HTML tag forms. That means when you create the form, you create it by using HTML tags, and you use ng model to bind these template forms to the variables that you have in your backend. So that's basically how these forms were created, or the template forms were created. After after AngularJS, from the second version of Angular, which is Angular 2 onwards, they started providing us with a mechanism called as ng model. Again, that hyphen is wrong there. There is no hyphen between ng and model. It's a single word. So ng model that allows us to build what today we call as template driven forms. They are those very same forms that allow us to have two-way binding between the model and the view. But then the thing about template forms is they are a little rigid in terms of you have to be validations and everything are from the view's point of view. Nothing is from the Angular point of view. To facilitate this better understanding of how um, validations can be applied in Angular itself, they came up with something called a reactive form. Now, these reactive forms look similar to a template form. They are not that different looking in terms of looks, because here also, when you want to create a view, you have to make use of these HTML tags only. There are no other tags that are given to us here. We still use HTML tags to create the view. But how is the form handled? How are the validations handled? How is the connectivity done? Now, all of this is what makes a reactive form different from a um, template driven form. Now, when I want to work with complex inputs or complex validation rules, or I want to have dynamic interactions between various form elements that I have and the users, then your reactive forms are really ideal for working with these. Reactive forms also follow what we call as a model-driven approach, which means that you create the form in the backend, that is in the model, and you get it to connect to a view, which has a very basic HTML form for you. So the connectivity happens between these two, which allows you to access the controls in a much more easier manner than you would be able to if you were working with a template-driven form. So how do we make use of these template-driven forms? How do we build them and how do we validate them? So for us to be able to work with reactive forms, sorry, I said template-driven forms earlier. I'm sorry, slip of tongue. So when we want to work with reactive forms in Angular, the first thing that we need is we need to import a module called as the reactive forms module, and this is under the Angular forms module that is available in your node modules. So you need to import this into the app module.ts, which helps to register the module as available for the entire application. Now, it is not mandatory that you should use only reactive forms. Neither is it mandatory that you should use template forms. Of course, template forms are easier to write and they are simpler to write. So we use reactive forms when there is a little bit more complex data than it would be in case of a simple simple template form. So you can have a combination of the two whenever you write your web applications. It is not necessarily one or the other. It could be one and the other, basically. So when you are going to create the reactive forms, the first step is for you to be able to import the React Forms module. Once the React Forms module is imported, you're going to create a brand new component for creating your form. So let us say that I have a component called as contact us, where I'm going to create a form which is going to be a contact form, basically. So once you've created your component, then you're going to create a form group in the component file. So what are these form groups and how do they help us work with this? What do they do? I mean, what is the point of having these groups and everything. So let us start by understanding what a form group is. Okay, so a form group basically is nothing but a group of controls that you're going to be placing on the form. Since we are going to be working programmatically with all of this, we are going to want to be able to group the controls into a single location. Now, if you take forms, for example, and you use the default form tag that is there when you're creating the HTML tag that you have, when you're creating your web applications front end, then you are going to write a form, and then along with the form, you're going to write the various contents that are there within the form. Now, what I want is to be able to bind these contents that I have, or the elements I have, the HTML elements, with the controls that I'm going to create in the backend. This forms a kind of tight coupling. So when I'm working with them, they are not going to be misinterpreted anywhere. It means that this control is going to work with this HTML element only. So you can bind them. But for me to be able to bind them, I need to put all of them in a single group. And this group is going to be associated with the form element that I'm going to be creating. Now, in this form element or in this form group, we are going to create form control. Each of these controls will have a name associated with them or a value along with a few other properties. So one of the first properties that is there within creating a form control is to give it a default value. So the first element, sorry, the first parameter that you provide is always going to be a default value that you want inside that particular control. So once the controls are ready, then you're going to create a template inside the view, the .html file. Once you create the view, you're going to bind the values that you have with the view. So once you bind the controls that you've created in the model with the view, now you have your entire form available to you. So the binding between the two happens through a directive called as the form control name directive. So this forms a kind of a tight coupling for me. So once I have coupled the two, another advantage is that now the form submissions and validations, everything can be handled in my model itself. I don't have to worry about handling a lot of these validations in my front end. I have to check the validations in the HTML. That is something that I have to do. But I can set up my validations in the back end or in the model for me to work with. This helps, or this is done through the validators module that you're going to import from Angular/forms. So sometimes what happens is that the amount of code that you're going to write with a form control and a form group can be quite a bit. So instead, we can use what is known as a form builder. Now, the form builder works in a similar manner. There isn't too much of a difference between using a form builder and a form group. The difference only is that you are going to have to inject the builder into the constructor of your component. Unlike when you're working with a form group and a form control where the injection is not necessary, but you can do this by injecting form builder into your constructor. So what is the advantage of working with a form builder? Nothing much. It just is easier to handle if you're going to work with it. That's about it. It makes it less verbose, basically. That's all it does, nothing else. So it does help you in the long run. The amount of code you write and the amount of code that the Angular server has to handle is going to be lesser. Now let's have a quick look at a quick demo that I have for working with. Now, if I'm going to be working with a simple demo, this is a simple app component.html that I have working with me. This I have two components basically that I have added. One is called as contact us and one is called as contact us with validations. So this contact us for component that I have, this is the HTML of this particular component. If you notice, I have written two types. here, this is a template form that I have created here. By the way, I have included Bootstrap. So you will find certain classes here which are conducive to Bootstrap. Only reason was I wanted to make my screen look good. So I've added Bootstrap. So if you see, I have a div inside which I have a form. Now this form is a template form that I have created initially. This template form I hadn't yet connected to my backend or to the model. This is just a template form that I had created. Now let's look at the backend first or the model first. Then we come back to working with the HTML. So if you look at the component that I have created, the contact us component, you will notice that I have a form called as a contact form. Now this form has a group, a form group associated with it. I have imported form control and form group along with the Angular/forms here. Now this form group has a few form controls associated with it. First name, last name, email, gender, is married, and country. Now this is the initial one. So here I have default values set up. You can give default values into this. You can say it's just a space. This is valid, or you can just say enter first name, or you can just say first name. Your choice on what you would like the default value to be. So once you have set up the default values, now what you're going to do is you're going to have to bind this. I also have a simple on submit, which will show me the details in the console. So now I have to bind this form group that I have created with my .html file. So I have rewritten the same form without making drastic changes to the old one so that you can have a look at both. And now here I have set up what is called as a form group. Now this contact form that I have is the name of the form group that I had created back here. So this is the same name which I am setting up and associating with this particular form. I'm also calling the ng submit here so that it calls the submit method that I have written. Now inside this, I have now got to bind. I have to bind the controls that I have created in the model with the HTML and I have bound them. As you can see, I have a directive called as the form control name directive, which I'm using to bind them to the input values or the input boxes that I'm creating here. I have done the same across. Same for my gender also. You will notice that when I'm working with checkboxes or with control buttons, doesn't matter. Should I say radio buttons? It doesn't matter. Still, you're going to bind it in this particular way. So depending on which value you select, that value is going to be replaced into that variable that you have created in the backend or the controller that you have created in the backend. Same holds for the checkboxes also. I also have a simple drop down which I have created and I'm connecting it to a form control name called as country. So whatever value I select, it's going to be there in country. Now I also have a text area. I haven't created anything for the text area. That's the reason I haven't bound it. So there is no text area created for me here, inquiry or whatever. I haven't created it, but you can if you want to. So let us call this as inquiry. And now all you have to do is bind it to this by using form control name. So all I have done is bind it now. Any content I put in will now be shown in the console. Now let us move back into my Git. Now this is my, I'm using Git bash as my command, the CLI. You can use command prompt as well, whichever is your preferred CLI. You can make use of that to run your code. Not a problem. Now I'm just going to serve this. So initially it is going to serve, if you notice, it will initially serve the app contact us, which is my first component that I have. This component is the one that will get served. So I'm waiting for it to serve it. Once it's done serving, then I'm just going to open it. Of course, I could have given a -o switch. That would have opened it automatically for me, but not a problem. I'm going to open it here. This is the form that I have. Now let me also right click and inspect so that we get into the console and have a look at what is going to happen. So I have given some basic content, right? Default values, that's what's going to be taken. So please note, I don't have any validations in place. So you will notice that whether I enter something or not, my reactive form works. No issues, I get the output. Now, not everywhere will something as simple as this work. I mean, what's the point of having a form if there are no validations on the form? Supposing I miss a field and it still allows me to submit my form, then what's the point of working with a form without validations? So what we'll do is we will create another component, or rather I've already created a component, and that component with the same fields. I don't have any other fields there. I've created another component called as contactors with validations. So let me open the model first. So if you look at this here, I have created a component again, and this component has inside its class, you will notice that I'm using a module called as the validators module. Now you will find that it is a part of your Angular forms. This validators module has a series of methods associated with it, or should I say enums associated with it, each of them having their own particular setups. So you can give the validators. Now in the previous case, you saw that we had given it a default value. Here also, you will see a default value here. When you look at the double quotes, there is nothing in between, but I can give some default values there, no problem. So you can give default values here, and I'm adding two validations here. One is that it is mandatory, it is required, and the other one is it has to have a minimum length. Now, the question would be for some people that here I can do the same thing in HTML also, or rather, I can write something that is going to work in a similar way when I'm working with HTML. Now, the advantage of working with this kind of a reactive form for validations especially is that it is inbuilt. The validations are going to be already available. I don't have to depend on my view understanding the validation that I'm going to put in. So I write the validation at the time of creating the form itself, which makes it binding it better with the view that I'm going to be working with. So I've set up the validations. Now for my validations to be accessible in the view, I need to be able to retrieve the validations. There are two ways of retrieving these controls along with their validations. One, by using the name of the form, and two, by using a getter. So you can say getter F, getter form controls, whatever you like. I've given it as getter form controls. You can have getter F. It's fine. I mean, the name is immaterial. The name of the getter is immaterial, but you have to give a getter if you want to be able to retrieve content programmatically. So this is one way of retrieving the controls that are associated with this particular contact form. So now let us look at the HTML associated with this, or the view associated with this. Now, if you look at this, this is the view that is associated with it. Not so different, except that you have a look at how the form controls are being accessed. You can either use the name of the form, contact form is the name of my form, dot controls, dot the name of the control and whether it is valid or not. Plus, I also check to see if that particular control is dirty or touched, right? So you have a look at all of these contents that are there within the form. You can also check for errors. You can also check for any kind of a change in the minimum length. So if I give a value that is greater than 10, it should show me an appropriate error message. Now, this is another advantage that we have when we work with your reactive forms, because then your ngIf actually works very beautifully. Now, here you will notice that I haven't given any colors or anything as such, but you can take it one step further by adding a class to all of this and setting up the color. So you can give a color here. You can say class equal to text danger, so that when this particular error pops up, it is going to be considered as, I mean, it will come up in red. So obviously it will draw your eye to it. So the same for this as well. You can set it up in this particular way, just showing you. Now that you have bounded and set up the form controls, I have set it up for each and every element that I have in my entire form. So every element that I have in the form has these particular form controls with the errors set up for them. Finally, I check to see if the contact form is valid. Now, if the contact form is valid, only then will I submit. Otherwise, this will be disabled. Now, I would like to run this instead of the other, this one that I have. So I'm just going to comment this out and I'm going to run the other one. Let's go back. And you will notice that it has changed. I haven't added the bootstrap to everything, but it has changed. You can make out. It says false here if you can make out. And because of that, you will notice that my submit button is not valid. So let me add a few values. It still says it is false. That means there is no binding. The binding hasn't happened properly. There seems to be some issue that is occurring. So I need to cross check to see what is the issue. But once you have entered all the values and if all the values are correct, then this will change to true. And once it changes to true, my submit button will become active. Now, this is a very simple basic demo that I have, literally very simple. And there is no place where I have checked to see if it is valid or not. If you look at it, it says false everywhere. I haven't set up the validation setup anywhere. Have a look at it. Do I have a valid form.valid anywhere? I don't. Literally, I don't. So unless and until all my fields are considered to be valid, till then my form is not considered to be valid. I am getting an issue with this particular input that I have. The first one that I have. It keeps giving me this. So that means that there is a issue that is occurring with this particular form control, which I have to cross check. So because of that, there is no validation or the validation does not change to true. Once an error is thrown, the validation is not going to be true. It's going to stay false. So till I ensure that each and every field that I have is going to be a valid field, till then my form will not get validated. This ensures that there is no, mistakenly clicking of the submit button at any point in time, because it will not submit unless and until, or it will not even activate or enable until and unless my entire form is fixed. So now that you've seen the various the various two types of forms that we have, what are the advantages of working with reactive forms? Of course, I haven't added one more there, which is a form builder. The reason being that I thought I would be able to type it in for you here. So let us see if I can actually, try and put it together for you maybe at the end of the session, once we are done with whatever I am supposed to be completing. So let's look at advantages. What are the advantages of reactive forms? So one of the things is that the view that you're going to create is only going to be working with the presentation logic. It is not going to be bothering about the validations also. The validations are in the back end, in the model. So it is easier to handle, it is cleaner to handle, and it's very easy to debug as well, because the validations are elsewhere. They are not in the view itself. You're just accessing those validations in the view because you want to be able to print some error messages that we have. So, they can be unit tested also pretty easily because everything is at the model level and not at the view level. So, because my forms are all created in the model or in the class component, for me, when I'm working with creating a form, I don't have to worry too much because all I have to do is look at the form controls that I'm creating in the backend and match the same with the view that I have. So there is no chance of me creating excess elements or matching wrong elements because what I'm creating in the backend, I already have that available to create a view that is going to work together beautifully. Another thing about working with custom validation, with reactive forms is what we call as custom validations. One excellent example of working with custom validations is password validation. So what I want to do is I have two fields, let us say, when I'm registering a particular person. So one field is for password. The second one is for confirming the password. Now what I want is to compare the two. So what we do is we write our own custom validation. If you were working with template driven forms, then that would lead to you having to create what is called as a custom directive. Here, all you have to do is work with creating a custom validation and then wrapping that validation into whatever validators that you have created for your reactive forms. So that's the idea, or that's what working with custom validations is all about. All you have to do is wrap it in and it is going to work. You can also track the changes to the form values and status. You can check whether it is pristine, it is dirty, touched, untouched by using all these various observables that we have. You happen to see dirty and touched inside in that particular validations form that I showed you. So this allows you to react dynamic forms basically. So in real time, a validation is performed. It is not performed after everything is filled. It is performed on dot. So when I click into a particular field, it has to look for the validation. It will perform the validation at that particular point. Any dynamic support necessary for any kind of manipulations is provided to you in real time by your reactive forms. They also have excellent error handling capabilities, as you have seen through these observables that we already have available with us. So since these reactive forms work with RxJS, you can very easily integrate your form handling with other operations without too much of trouble, so to say. So for example, let us say I want to perform user authentication because of the observables that I use, because of a reactive form where the form controls are created internally. I can use those form controls directly to call an API. I don't have to worry about the binding because it's going to be taken care of by the directives that I'm going to be making use of. So my API accessing, everything works beautifully when I'm working with reactive forms. Again, I repeat, reactive forms are something that you can use in combination with template driven forms, because not everywhere do you require the uh, power and the flexibility that a reactive form gives you. There will be situations where a template form will work just as beautifully and with less trouble. So you can make use of template forms. Reactive forms require you to write a bit of code or some programming is necessary, especially in the model class, so that you can create these forms in a much more flexible and beautiful manner. And yes, Bootstrap is one of the CSS tools that we use to make sure that our forms look beautiful, our application looks beautiful. You can take it further by writing your own CSS to make all of this look as pretty as you like. So what are the best practices to create reactive forms? Wherever possible, please use Form Builder to create your form. it's preferable to working with a form group and a form control. Then please use custom validators. Write your own custom validators for any kind of a validation logic for which you don't have any validators available. Then please use async wherever possible. Don't use subscribing to templates. Getters to access is always preferable as opposed to using the form name. So I showed you how you can use the form name as well, but using a getter is considered much more preferable to access controls and groups. The control stays with the model. It doesn't move to the view. So it's preferable that you use a getter for all of this. Then use set or patch value for direct manipulation of any controls that you want. For example, if you're planning on updating a particular user, let us say that you have an API that is accessing a user's or a customer's data. They have to update something. You can use update dot set value or whatever is the form name dot set value, and you can pass the new values to these very same form controls. This ensures that your API that is going to call the form controls or that is going to use the values that are there in the form controls will have access to the latest values that are available. Another thing that you can do is these reactive forms have a method available with them called as the reset form. Please use this reset form whenever you want to be able to reset the form. Please don't set empty spaces or use the HTML's reset button. It's preferable that you work with a reset form when you're working with reactive forms. Template forms, your choice, but when you're working with reactive forms, it's always preferable that you call the reset form method of your reactive forms. And that's it from my end, guys. Over to you, Ria.
Thank you, Pallavi, for your invaluable insights on technology. I'm sure it was certainly a very informative session for all of you. If you guys are interested in learning more about the Angular course, do check out our super discounted batches of virtual instructor LED trainings on our website, springpeople.com. These VILT trainings are leveraged online from the comforts of your home and flexible as per your schedule and location. If you do not find any suitable batches, we'd be happy to discuss and schedule private batches for you. If you don't have time to join live online, then do try out our affordable self-paced courses. For more information, do write to us at training@springpeople.com or call on our number displayed on the current slide. Now we will open the forum to answer questions that we have received during the session. So let's get started with our questions. Over to you, Pallavi.
Thank you, Ria. Um, so can you please tell me if you have any questions, people?
Okay, thank you, Pallavi, once again, and thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. We shall be sending out the webinar recording to all you participants soon. I request you to kindly provide feedback before signing off, which will help us improve the quality of our future events. Thanks again for joining us today. Signing off on behalf of Team Spring People. Hope to see you again for our next expert webinar. Thank you.